There's nothing that generates more hype in the gaming community than a good old-fashioned crossover. Take two popular IPs, bring them together, and watch the money roll in. One of the most popular crossovers in gaming history is Kingdom Hearts, a crossover between Disney's cartoon characters and Square Enix's Final Fantasy series. Kingdom Hearts is a 2002 action RPG where you fight enemies with abilities and items from the Final Fantasy series in levels based on classic Disney movies. The really interesting thing about Kingdom Hearts is that while Disney and Final Fantasy characters do appear and do play a part in the game's plot, the actual story is an original one about a boy named Sora who journeys across various different Disney worlds to find his lost friends and defeat the forces of darkness that took him away from his home. I think having an original story really helped the series have its own identity.
Which is funny because as the series went on, I think it got way too caught up in its own lore.
The Disney worlds began to feel more and more like contractually obligated filler, and they basically stopped introducing new Final Fantasy characters. But the original game I felt had the best balance of all three. Disney worlds that felt important to the plot, Final Fantasy characters that made up the supporting cast, and original characters that the story revolved around. The series actually began because the game's director, Tetsuya Nomura, who had been an artist and designer at Square for a few years now, was looking for a way to make a 3D game as impactful as Super Mario 64, but to do so, he felt that you'd need an iconic character. One of Nomura's colleagues even said you need a character as popular as one of Disney's. Around the same time, Square veterans like Final Fantasy director Hironobu Sakaguchi and Final Fantasy producer Shinji Hashimoto had been in discussions with Disney as Square and Disney shared an office in Japan. One thing led to another, and eventually the plan for a Final Fantasy and Disney crossover was greenlit. At first glance, a team up between Disney, who were known for their cast of colorful kid-friendly characters, and Square's Final Fantasy series, which was known for its more teen-oriented, cool, edgy characters, seemed like a bad fit. But if you think about it, it actually does fit a little bit better than you'd think. Both Disney and Final Fantasy are all about going on these adventures in larger-than-life fantasy worlds, meeting interesting new people, and overcoming insurmountable odds. While one is more aimed at kids and the other is more aimed at teens, Kingdom Hearts does a really good job at meeting both series in the middle. The fact that a majority of the games in the series are rated E10+, the rating in between E for everyone and T for teens, is a fitting representation of that. The tone and character interactions of the series align more with Disney, but the darker lore and themes lean more towards Final Fantasy. Like I mentioned before, the Final Fantasy character representation slowed down tremendously as the series went on, and even in the beginning, there weren't a ton of them. Most of the characters in the first game were ones that Nomura himself designed, like Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, Squall from Final Fantasy VIII, and Tidus from Final Fantasy X. In Kingdom Hearts 2, things did get a little bit better as we got some more characters like Auron from Final Fantasy X and Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, and we even got some non-Nomura designed characters like Setzer from Final Fantasy VI and Vivi from Final Fantasy IX. The last major Final Fantasy character added to the series was Zack from Final Fantasy VII, who was included in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep all the way back in 2010. I guess as a consolation prize, the next new game in the series, Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance, instead of introducing Final Fantasy characters, added characters from another game Tetsuya Nomura had his hands in, 2007's The World Ends With You on the Nintendo DS. On the other side of the coin, Disney has been eating constantly. The series does tend to reuse worlds rather often. I mean, Agrabah is in like half of the games and Olympus Coliseum is in almost all of them, but for the most part, we have a ton of different Disney movies represented here, from oldies like Snow White, Alice in Wonderland, and Cinderella, to classics like The Lion King, Lilo and Stitch, and Mulan, to some newer hits like Frozen, Big Hero 6, and Tangled. Considering Disney owns almost everything now, I'm just waiting for Kingdom Hearts 4 in 2032 to have Sora hanging out with Winnie the Pooh, Spider-Man, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The series as a whole has had its ups and downs, but honestly, I've enjoyed almost every game in the series. Just about every game has introduced an interesting mechanic like Chain of Memories' deck building card game battle system, or Birth by Sleep's command deck, or Dream Drop Distance's flow motion. And of course, it's always nice to go on adventures in these awesome Disney worlds.
The series is still going strong to this day, and while it is a very, very strange franchise, I'm optimistic about what's next for this crossover.
Another strange, out-of-nowhere crossover series is Marvel vs. Capcom, a crossover between the comic book juggernaut Marvel Comics and the video game giant Capcom. Marvel vs. Capcom is a series of fighting games where Marvel characters fight Capcom characters. Yeah, that's about it. It seems really random having a crossover between an American comic book company and a Japanese video game company, but it makes sense as even before Marvel vs. Capcom began, both companies had an ongoing relationship thanks to the various Marvel licensed games that Capcom had made. Marvel saw the potential for big bucks that video games based on their licensed characters had, especially thanks to Konami's super popular 4-player 1992 X-Men arcade game. Capcom was an arcade behemoth in the late 80s to mid 90s thanks to the likes of Ghosts and Goblins, Final Fight, and Street Fighter 2, especially Street Fighter 2. So it's reasonable that Marvel would get an experienced and esteemed game developer like Capcom to make games for them. The first Marvel fighting game that Capcom developed was 1994's X-Men Children of the Atom, which used the same arcade system board as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Capcom's other fighting game series, Darkstalkers. This was a 2D fighter with a roster of popular X-Men characters like Wolverine, Cyclops, and Psylocke. There was an X-Men animated cartoon series running around this time, so it made sense Marvel would want to cash in with a video game. The game's fast-paced combo-heavy style would become a staple of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. This game also has Akuma from the Street Fighter series as a guest character, which planted the seeds for more potential crossover mayhem in the future. The following year, 1995, Capcom released Marvel's Super Heroes, another fighting game, but this time they brought in characters from other Marvel series like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and even Thanos. Like Akuma in X-Men Children of the Atom, there was another Capcom guest character, this time Anita from the Darkstalkers series. She is a hidden character and only available in the Japanese version of the game. Her character is incomplete though, with several missing features like her own character portrait, which has Thanos as a placeholder. The next game was 1996's X-Men vs. Street Fighter, which removed the rest of the Marvel characters outside of the X-Men, but brought in Street Fighter characters into the fray like Ryu, Chun-Li, and M. Bison. Finally, we had a true crossover fighter in the series, which is probably why this game is considered to be the first official game in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, even if the name is completely different. This game would implement the tag team combat that the Marvel vs. Capcom series is now known for. The rest of the Marvel Universe would hop in the crossover action with the next game in the series, 1997's Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. The X-Men received less focus, and instead Marvel characters as a whole were represented, just like with 1995's Marvel Superheroes. The following year, 1998, is when we would finally get Marvel vs. Capcom, Clash of Superheroes. It only took Capcom making 4 different Marvel fighting games to finally just make a full crossover between the two. Some of the non-Street Fighter Capcom reps include Jin Saotome from Capcom's 1995 mecha fighting game Cyberbots Full Metal Madness, Morrigan from Darkstalkers, Captain Commando from the 1991 beat-em-up of the same name, and the Blue Bomber himself, Mega Man. One of my favorite parts about, well, any crossover franchise is seeing the roster grow each game. Every hot new IP that comes out of Marvel or Capcom is gonna have a chance to be a fighter in the series. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and its updated version introduced some big names into the series, like Deadpool, Doctor Strange, Phoenix Wright, and Dante from the Devil May Cry series. Marvel vs. Capcom would become one of the most important and culturally impactful fighting game franchises ever created. The insanely technical combos, plethora of memorable characters, and super skillful combat make this series timeless. Obviously, you can't make a video about crossovers without mentioning 1999's Super Smash Bros., developed by HAL Laboratory, the first game in a crossover fighting game series featuring characters from various Nintendo franchises. Interestingly, the series was originally not going to feature Nintendo characters at all. It was going to be an original IP called Dragon King, the fighting game. However, similarly to Kingdom Hearts, the game's director, Masahiro Sakurai, thought that bringing in recognizable characters would draw more people to the game, so he made the characters Nintendo mascots, an idea which was later approved by Nintendo. The original game's roster consists of Mario, Link from The Legend of Zelda, Kirby, Fox from Star Fox, Samus from Metroid, Donkey Kong, Yoshi, and Pikachu from Pokemon. The 4 unlockable characters include the other member of the Super Mario Bros., Luigi, Jigglypuff from Pokemon, Captain Falcon from F-Zero, and Ness from Earthbound. Both of those last 2 characters might as well be from Smash Bros., as neither one of their respective series have had a new game in the last decade and a half. In the more recent games, the rosters have grown astronomically, so only having 12 characters in the original game does seem a bit small. Although, to be fair, I think these 12 are a really solid representation of the big Nintendo franchises at the time. Maybe you could throw Punch-Out in that category, but besides that, the representation is quite good here. Smash is quite unique for its time, as unlike many other fighting games made before it, where the goal is to reduce your opponent's health to 0, in Smash, the goal is to knock your opponent off of the stage. There were fighting games that experimented with this alternate win condition, typically called a ring out, but what separates Smash from those games is in Smash, this is the main win condition. There's no health bars. Instead, doing damage to your opponent makes their percent higher, and having a higher percent makes them easier to knock off of the ring. This makes Smash a much more movement-focused game, with the characters being able to jump long distances and maneuver in the air with ease. Stage presence is already a big factor in more traditional fighting games, but in Smash, it's everything. There's so many ways you can die in this game. You can get knocked off the stage horizontally, you can get knocked off of the stage straight up, or you can fall straight down into the abyss. As such, you never feel safe in Smash Bros, which constantly adds to the tension. Smash has become one of the top fighting game franchises, and its unique style of gameplay helped start a new genre of fighting game, platform fighters, which several other games have dipped their toes into, like Brawlhalla and Rivals of Aether. Those were just some of my favorite crossovers, but no worries, there's still plenty more cool crossovers to talk about next time.